Going to carry on with this kind of small works project. Idea being to sort of paint something in a session if we can. So it's partly inspired by things like this, the sort of daily painting movement. This book is all about artists that try and do a painting within a session. So the idea was to take on something that's not too complicated, something that you can manage within a couple of hours. So I've just sketched this out, and I've made quite a bad job of it really, in terms of the positioning. It's all a bit squashed over to this side, and I probably could have done with a bit more room here. So if I'd have had another 5 or 10 minutes, I would have wiped it out and repainted it. Or re-sketched it, because it's just not quite. But it's really, what I thought I'd do today is have a little look at colour. So it's a what do you call it? A refresher or something like that. For most of you, I'll have covered this before. Last week we were looking at tone, and I've got a few more examples. That was from your demo from Tuesday, so you can see there. And these two are this one I actually used for an article years and years ago I wrote for a magazine. This one I actually set it up in the studio and created like spotlighting sort of within a sort of boxed off area, so that it cut out the light. That my studio is quite flat light, it's a conservatory, so it cut out most of the light and then just had direction lighting. It's quite a nice way of sort of staging and creating atmosphere through lighting. So obviously just black and white, there's no colour in it. These are all white objects, so it's all the drama is created out of the light and dark. So that's something that if you're interested in doing, you can have a go at. So it's kind of what we did last week, but I just thought I'd show you that one. And that's a similar one that I did in my work. Today, yeah, thinking about colour and really just refreshing some of the colour ideas I've talked about before. As you know, I use this particular colour wheel, which when it's filled in looks a bit like that. It's using two of the primaries, so a red that's slightly purpley, a red that's slightly orangey, yellow that's slightly orangey, yellow that's slightly greeny, a blue that's greeny and a blue that's purpley. So I always think that it's really good to have, and to be honest, I don't use an awful lot of the greeny yellow, just the sort of subjects of paint. I don't need that to be too greeny, but I tend to use something like a cadmium yellow pale sometimes, that's quite useful, and an orange. But most of the other colours are really useful to have in the paint box, so pretty much always have those in there. I've also got other colours. I'll talk a bit more maybe next week about the earth colours, talk about the other, because I don't normally talk about that much. I tend to talk about the primaries more. So in terms of this particular still life, I'll just paint a few little bits or a few things. So I'm thinking the background, obviously it's really dark, so to make a dark, it will be a mixture of, with the colours I've got here, I probably can't get very dark. I could use some alizarin crimson, which is the purpley red, and some ultramarine, and that gets me something like a dark purple. So to make it a little bit closer to black, perhaps a tiny bit of yellow, but that's as, you know, with just primaries, that's as close as I could get to a black. So for that reason, I usually mix in some of the dark colours that I've got on the palette. You could use, I mean, some people do use black. I occasionally use black myself. But more often than not, I would mix something like a brown. That's what do you call that one? That's the raw umber, and then a little bit of ultramarine. And that gets something, yeah, I'll put that next to there. I don't know if you can see the difference. It's slightly blacker, slightly darker. And for this sort of subject, although this is technically a black piece of card that's got rather scuffed up, it still will reflect quite a bit of light around, so it will be more like a grey shade. So that would probably suffice for that. Things like the box, I might be able to adjust what I've got here and get some of these. So again, just using primaries. We'll add some yellow to the mix I've got there. This is a bit like a lemon yellow, so it's a quite quite a green yellow. Yeah, that gets a nice sort of browny colour. That would work fairly well for the cardboard box. And I can add a tiny bit of white to that for the areas that are a little bit lighter. This bit on the top, to me, that's reflecting a little bit of red in there. So I'll add the tiniest bit of red. For sort of cardboard box type colour, sort of pinky terracotta. I guess it's also these lights, isn't it? Not lights, these heaters. That's why it's all gone red. Just remember. So that area, there's also shadow there. So again, I mix some of the so-called black colour, which is a little bit too purple, so a little bit more yellow in with that. Just darken that down a tiny bit. Sort of under here, got some nice sort of shadow colours. The apple itself, pick another brush, crimson, a little crimson is going to be the closest I can get to that. So, but it's also in shadow. So again, if I mix some of this slightly purpley mix I've got here in with it, there's some really quite deep shadows here. And I find that when I'm painting something like a simple still life, it's really important to get those deep shadows in. Quite often, or not so much with our group here, but when I get people that are quite new to art, they'll sort of paint a flat, maybe a flat red colour. Let's go, something more like that, and then try and darken it. But I find that it's more effective to go a little bit darker first, and then start to paint some of the lighter colours into that. A bit like that. Then, yep, that could be like that. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop in a minute because I'm losing my voice. The last thing will be just to get some highlights. So, just adding a tiny bit of white to the mix. And it's not white, but it's like a lightish pink colour, something like that. So that'll be a little passage. And the same would apply to these tangerines. Although they're orange, they're really more browns. Probably some of the shadow colours closer to that sort of colour. So I'll be going in with something like that first, and then and then going a bit lighter. Any questions? There. Okay. All good to go. Yep. Okay. Right. I'll let you crack on then.